what do you think? This is a Seinfeld show or one of those weird stuff where you have people laughing in the background? Are you paying me?
Yeah, this is November 24th, 2016, Thanksgiving Day. This is my Aunt Bonnie. She's my aunt on my father's side. And we're going to do a heritage video here. I'm Jeff Best and Bonnie Best. So, Bonnie, can you tell us about your family?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So, as Jeff mentioned, I'm Jeff's aunt. Jeff's father is my oldest brother and my only brother. So Jeff's father, Duke, is the oldest in the family. I'm the youngest of four. Duke was the oldest. Dolores was the next. She was my oldest sister. She was 4 years younger than Duke. She passed away when she was about 68, as I remember. So she's gone now. And then there's Mary, and Mary is only 2.5 years older than I am. There was quite a gap in age between Dolores and Mary. So Duke and Dolores were 4 years apart, and then there was a 9-year gap, and then there's Mary and I. So my brother is actually 16 years older than I am. That's family. Jeff is Duke's oldest son. He has a brother and a sister. And then I have other nieces and nephews. Actually, if Jeanette and Susan are watching this, hello. It's been a while since I've seen Jeanette and Susan. That's Dolores was the oldest. She's gone now. Those are her daughters. And then, let's see, what else do we want to know about family? I've just moved here in January of this year, January 2016, I moved here from California. So it's nice now that I'm living down near Sedona in a place called Rimrock, 20 minutes southeast of Sedona. And it's nice because it's less than an hour drive, a 50-minute drive from where I live now to visit Jeff. So it's been fun to visit Jeff and Keisha.
Bonnie, you want to tell us a little about your parents, my grandparents?
Oh, yes. So Jeff's grandfather and grandmother were my parents. Edward Otto Best was a professional photographer, and I know that that's where Duke and Jeff get their photography interest, wanting to be photographers and having been photographers. My mother, Lillian Best, was my mother, Jeff's grandmother. They're both gone now. My father, Jeff's grandfather, died when he was in his 60s, and then my mother lived until she was 84. They were my mother was the youngest in her family. She was the only one of her siblings who was born here in the United States. My father, he and his brother and sister were all born here in the United States. Our grandparents were all from either Czechoslovakia, Prague, or Moldova. We didn't know about my mother being born in Moldova until after she passed away, when Jeff's father, Duke, found out on a birth certificate she was actually born in Moldova. Her parents were born in Moldova. Anything else? My sister Mary lives in Florida. Jeff's father, Duke, my brother, lives in Oregon right now.
And Bonnie, during your lifetime, what kind of businesses have you been involved in? What kind of employment have you held during your lifetime?
It's been an eclectic career. I started as a teacher. Actually, I was a teacher at 3 years old, and I'm still a teacher today. So teaching's been my main passion and who I really am. My first career, professional career, was teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math. I did that for 9 years. Then they closed my school, and I went to work for the phone company in California. Worked for Pacific Telephone for 9 years. And there I was a computer programmer, I was a systems analyst, I was a manager, supervisor, and I did some planning when AT&T broke up into different companies. When they broke up the monopoly of AT&T, I stayed with Pacific Bell and helped them strategize and build a plan, a strategic plan. Then I took early retirement because I wanted to be a teacher. Actually, while I was still working at the phone company as a computer programmer, I was teaching for University of San Francisco at nights. I missed teaching. So I was teaching one night a week in a program that was a special program an accelerated program, 18 months for people to get their bachelor's degree. So I did that for 9 years. Then when I retired in 1987, it was a fascinating time for me because it was like the world was my playground. It's like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? I said I was going to teach worldwide. And I did some of that. I went to Russia, taught in Russia. I've taught in Canada. I've taught in Mexico. I've taught across the United States. I was doing mediation, which is conflict resolution. I've taught lawyers how to be mediators. I've taught computer classes. I went to work at an adult school, California, in a place called Castro Valley. Castro Valley Adult School, I taught there for 11 years. I taught computer classes. And then I took retirement. I've taken actually retirement several times. And last year, I came up with a new name for my business. For a while, my business was called Best Communications. I started it in 1988. And it was a little confusing because there was another company called Best Internet Communications, but they were known as Best Communications. So there was a conflict between my name and their name. I changed my business name then to just B.Best, which is what I've stayed with. B.Best is my business name. And last year I came to terms with the challenge I have is that I have a lot of talents, a lot of gifts. I'm a spiritual person, I'm an energy healer. I'm also a computer person. I'm a nerd, I'm a geek. And so combining those two had been a challenge until last year. And I came up with the term heart-centered business, heart-centered technology mentor. And if you look up on Google, there's only one person who's a heart-centered technology mentor, and that's me. And then 4 months ago, actually about 6 months ago, I said, okay, I'm retired. But then 4 months ago, I came out of retirement because a block from where I live, there's a little rural library, community library that is a public/school library. It's attached to an elementary school. I was going there frequently, and I found out they needed a librarian. So 4 months ago, I became a librarian at the local community library. It's run by the county of Yavapai here in Arizona. So I've been a librarian now for 4 months, and I love it.
Very good. Regarding the history of this country, Bonnie, we've seen a lot of changes here. We just recently had another election. Can you tell us some of the highlights you've seen in the history of this country and in the world during your lifetime?
Sure. Actually, we were talking about this at Thanksgiving dinner a little while ago. Jeff was asking me about, I went to UC Berkeley for college. I was there from 1964 until 1969. I was there for 5 years. And during that time, in 1964, was what was called the free speech movement. And it wasn't really well known outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, Berkeley, Oakland, but eventually it spread across the United States. College students were protesting. They felt that there was restraint and that they wanted us to be more the democratic country we are and to have the ability to speak freely. So that started in Berkeley. And then there was the Vietnam War, a lot of protesting, and I lived in San Francisco for a while, and we lived near Haight-Ashbury. So I used to go over, and there were parades and protests, and the whole thing about the Vietnam War was during that time period. So it was a fascinating time. In those days, I was an observer. I tended to stand back and watch. Actually, I still do that. Stand back and watch and observe and learn. I love to learn. I love to grow. So I've always been paying attention to what's going on, but I don't usually get in the middle of it. So I did not get arrested. I did not get affected by the tear gas. I did not get hurt by any of the police brutality. So I was watching, observing. And then in 1986, I took a trip to Russia. And that was when it was still part of the Soviet Union. And I was there in the first trip I took to Russia was called Journey to the Heart of Russia. And we were staying with families, and we were learning about spirituality and what was going on in Russia at that time. Learned a lot on that trip. And then a few years later, I went with mediators. In 1990, I went with mediators. 1990, 89, 90. We had a group of mediators, and we went to different parts of Russia. And that was during the time of what they call perestroika, which was Russia was opening up. And the Soviet Union was eventually breaking apart. They eventually broke apart into different countries. But we were in Russia and Minsk, Kiev, I was in Sochi, St. Petersburg. In those days it was called Leningrad. So I have visited Russia. And it was about that time when the wall came down in Germany, when they finally dismantled the wall because they finally figured out that that wall was not actually giving the results that the people, why it was originally built, it was never what they expected or wanted or needed, and they finally pulled it down. So there's been a lot of interesting things that have happened in the last, and then this year, just like this month actually, we have this very strange election, and I understand it's not actually totally resolved yet who's going to be our new president in 2017. So I expect my expectation is that 2017 is going to be a very powerful year. We have gone through some major changes, and we're ready for some new major changes. There's something called the New Earth. Eckhart Tolle actually has a book called The New Earth. We have the New Earth and we have the old way. We have the old way of doing things, we have the new way of doing things. And right now we're seeing the conflict and the challenges of how do we transform from the old way of doing things to the new way. There used to be a lot of conflict. We're ready now to have a new earth, which is cooperation, collaboration, peace, joy, love. It's called Love Revolution. I am looking forward to the new way of doing things.
Did you say you were there in Russia in 1990?
1990.
I recently did some reading. There was a lot of conflict in the world. 1989, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, I believe it was 1989. The Romanian Revolution, when they kicked out the dictator Ceausescu, was 1989. And Tiananmen Square was also in 1989.
Actually, I think it was 89 because I was planning to go back in 90. But the weekend I was planning to be there in 1990 is when the revolution happened and when they put Yeltsin was locked up in his, they call it a dacha.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it's fascinating because I was part of the computer group and we had these computer communications, the email and communications. And many people claim that it was because we had open communications and we could actually be in touch, that the KGB was not able to close down everything because we had these links that were not government sanctioned. Actually, my trip to Russia in 1989 was not government sanctioned. It was all grassroots, which is very unusual because that was when it was still the Soviet Union and there was still a KGB. I actually taught the Underground Democratic Party. I did a workshop for the Underground Democratic Party for 3 nights in Leningrad. And had the KGB known what I was up to, I would have ended up in Siberia.
Fascinating. So one other topic here, Bonnie, we have 5 minutes left regarding travel and any closing remarks. You've touched on your travels in Russia. Are there any other travels you'd like to discuss and any closing remarks?
Yeah, I was in Russia twice, and both times I actually started by going to, see which one did I go to, Russia and then Australia. I spent time in Australia. I spent time in Germany. I had a friend who taught school at a military base in Augsburg, Germany. So I was in Germany, Switzerland, I was in England, I was in Russia, I was in Australia. I still want to go to New Zealand. I really want to spend some time. At some point, New Zealand is high, but actually even higher. Someday I want to go to Prague because that's where all our grandparents, that's where our father, your grandfather, my father.
Ancestors, yeah.
That's great grandfather. They're from Prague area. I'd like to visit there, but I haven't been there yet. But I've been to Australia, and then I've been to Canada and Mexico. I love to travel. Russia and Australia were both really powerful. The one trip I had to Russia, I spent traveling around and spending time in youth hostels. And I would get on a bus. I had this unlimited pass on the bus, and I could get on and off, on and off, on and off. So I did this circuit. I started in Sydney, went up the Gold Coast, then into where Ayers Rock is, Alice Springs, and then back down through Adelaide, and then another time I went to Australia, I went to Melbourne. So I love being in Australia. It's an amazing place, and Sydney is very much like San Francisco. So I love to travel. I'd like to do some more traveling. And as I say, Prague. One of the things I want to do now is I want to take a river cruise in Europe and end up, the river cruise I think might start like in Paris and then go up the rivers and then end up in Prague. So those are my travel experiences. Well, basically closing remarks is like, I'm happy to do this for Jeff. Kind of like sprang it on me after we finished dinner today. And I'm happy to do this perhaps for those of my relatives who haven't seen me for a while. You get a chance to hear a little bit about my story. Oh, and exciting times I'm celebrating today because I now have 5 books published. I've published 1 book every year. 2012 was my first, then 2013, 14, 15, and I just published my 5th book. So I'm excited about that. I'm now a published author of 5 books. And life is great.
Bonnie, thanks so much for sharing with us. Our time is running out here. Thanks much now.